When I think about the Middle Ages, I picture a world filled with hardship, brutality, and constant injustice. For some rulers from that era, that reputation couldn't have been more deserved. Ruthless kings, unforgiving queens, and fanatical leaders who encouraged bloodshed ruled with little mercy, creating their own violent systems of justice. Each of these monarchs had different reasons for the cruelty they carried out. Some sought revenge by ordering massive slaughters, while others stirred up violent crowds that ended up killing thousands of innocent people. In late medieval Italy, a few noble families even turned cruelty into entertainment, forcing furriers to swallow handfuls of hair as a form of punishment. Meanwhile, conquering rulers took a more straightforward approach, marching from one city to the next, capturing everything in their path and killing both enemies and ordinary subjects without hesitation. Whether they were eliminating political rivals or spreading fear across entire regions, these rulers left behind a legacy of violence that became the defining feature of their reigns. Before I get into today's story, I want to mention one quick thing. If you enjoy these videos and want to support the channel, you can join us in our crusade against the AI pestilence by becoming a YouTube member or supporting us on Patreon. We release an extra video there every month, and there are already several waiting for you to check out. Pedro the Cruel. Pedro the Cruel was one of those rare rulers whose nickname perfectly matched the kind of man he was. He became King of Castile and Leon when he was only about 16 years old, taking the throne in the middle of the 14th century. Even at a young age, Pedro was known for being intelligent, well-educated, hard-working, and a generous supporter of the arts. Strangely enough, despite his reputation for loving women, he treated them terribly. After marrying his first wife, Blanche of Bourbon, he abandoned her only 2 days later so he could return to one of his many mistresses. He had Blanche locked away, and while she was in captivity, she died under mysterious circumstances. Many historians believe Pedro arranged to have her poisoned. His cruelty didn't stop there. According to accounts from the time, he had his half-brother Fadrique thrown out of a window to his death while calmly continuing to eat his lunch. On another occasion, he ordered one of his ministers to be strangled and then beheaded right in front of his dinner guests, showing little concern for the horror of the moment. Pedro was just as merciless toward those who had once been close to him. He imprisoned his friend and royal treasurer, Samuel ben Levi, and had him tortured until he died. He also reportedly used captured Moorish prisoners as live targets for archery practice, treating human lives as though they meant nothing. His violent life finally came to an equally violent end in 1369. At only 34 years old, Pedro was stabbed to death by another of his half-brothers. That brother later claimed the throne and became Henry II, King of Castile and Leon. No list of the Middle Ages' most brutal rulers would feel complete without Prince Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula to those who knew him. He ruled Wallachia, a region that is now part of modern-day Romania, from 1436 until his death. Although history remembers him as one of the era's most terrifying rulers, many people in his homeland regarded him as a hero because of his fierce resistance to the expanding Ottoman Empire. During one of his conflicts with the Saxons, a contemporary letter claimed that Vlad attacked a group of Saxon merchants, seized everything they owned, threw them into prison, and eventually had all 41 of them impaled. That horrifying method of execution became the act for which he would be remembered above all else. His reputation for terror only grew during his war against Sultan Mehmed II. When the Ottoman army advanced, they reportedly discovered a gruesome forest of impaled bodies. One account described around 20,000 men, women, and children skewered on stakes, with even infants said to have been impaled alongside their mothers. The shocking sight was intended to spread fear long before any battle began. Impalement was far from the only punishment associated with Vlad. Historical accounts also accuse him of ordering mutilations, blindings, burnings, strangulations, and even throwing victims to wild animals. Some stories went even further, claiming that he forced prisoners to eat the flesh of other captives. Whether every one of those tales is completely true or has been exaggerated over time is still debated, but together they helped establish his lasting reputation as one of history's cruelest rulers. Many historians believe that Vlad's violent legacy eventually inspired Bram Stoker when he created his famous novel Dracula. Emperor Wengsuan of Northern Qi was the founder of China's Northern Qi dynasty. His reign began in the year 550 after he forced the emperor of Eastern Wei to give up the throne. During the early years of his rule, the armies of Northern Qi grew stronger than ever, and for a time the empire experienced stability and relative peace. As the years passed, however, Wengsuan's behavior changed dramatically. Historical records suggest that his mental health steadily deteriorated, and he developed a serious dependence on alcohol. He became increasingly unstable, with frequent outbursts of violent rage that made him feared by everyone around him. His jealousy toward his concubines often ended in tragedy. He reportedly forced one of them to take her own life, while another was beheaded. According to the accounts, he later had her severed head placed on a serving platter and even played one of her legs like a musical instrument during a royal banquet, horrifying everyone who witnessed it. His cruelty extended throughout the imperial court. He is said to have sexually assaulted many of the women who served there, and those who resisted his advances often paid with their lives. When it came to executions, he showed little mercy, using methods that included burning, drowning, and dismemberment. Over time, Wengsuan's desire to kill became so extreme that his prime minister supposedly kept a group of prisoners available at all times, simply so the emperor could execute someone whenever the urge struck him. If a prisoner somehow managed to survive for 3 months without being selected, that person was reportedly granted their freedom. Wengsuan died in 559 at around 32 years of age, with alcoholism believed to have been the most likely cause. According to historical accounts, even at the end of his life, he claimed that he had nothing to regret. Philip IV of France played a central role in the destruction of one of the most famous military orders of the Middle Ages, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, better known as the Knights Templar. Founded in 1118 to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, the order established its headquarters on the Temple Mount and remained one of the most powerful institutions in Western Christendom for nearly 200 years. Philip earned a reputation as a dishonest ruler, a bully, and a master of political manipulation. If he had a modern dating profile, it probably wouldn't attract many admirers. Behind his polished image was a king who was willing to bend the truth whenever it served his interests. Money was one of his biggest problems. He owed the Knights Templar an enormous debt, yet instead of paying what he owed, he devised a plan to seize the order's wealth. To make his actions appear justified, he pressured the Pope into supporting him and relied on his minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, to build a legal and political case against the Templars. Philip had already shown this pattern before. After running up massive war debts, he expelled the Jews from France and confiscated their property to refill the royal treasury. In 1307, Philip accused the Knights Templar of blasphemy, idol worship, and participating in corrupt and secret rituals. Historians overwhelmingly believe these accusations were fabricated and designed to provide an excuse for destroying the order. It wasn't the first time Philip had used such tactics. When Pope Boniface VIII challenged his authority, Philip responded by spreading accusations of heresy and sorcery against him. The campaign against the Templars followed the same political playbook. Then, at dawn on Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip ordered the arrest of Grandmaster Jacques de Molay, along with Templars throughout France. Many of those arrested were tortured until they confessed to crimes they almost certainly had never committed. Afterward, a number of them were burned alive at the stake. Under relentless pressure from Philip, Pope Clement V officially dissolved the Knights Templar in 1312. bringing one of medieval Europe's most powerful military orders to an end. Most people know William the Conqueror as the man who crossed the English Channel and conquered England in 1066 after the Battle of Hastings. Like many invading armies of the time, his forces burned villages as they advanced, using scorched earth tactics to weaken resistance and intimidate the local population. In medieval warfare, that kind of destruction was sadly nothing unusual. What set William apart was what happened after he had secured the English crown. Once he became king, he pushed those brutal methods much further than most rulers of his era. When people in northern England refused to accept Norman rule and continued to resist, William launched a ruthless campaign during the winter of 1069 to 1070 that would become known as the Harrying of the North. According to the chronicler Orderic Vitalis, William showed no mercy in his determination to crush the rebellion. He relentlessly pursued his enemies, but the punishment extended far beyond those who had actually fought against him. Entire communities suffered as crops, livestock, farming tools, and food supplies were deliberately destroyed, leaving the countryside unable to support its people. The consequences were catastrophic. Historical accounts claim that more than 100,000 people died from starvation, and some reports even describe desperate survivors turning to cannibalism in an attempt to stay alive. Although historians continue to debate the exact death toll, the scale of the devastation was enormous. Because of the widespread destruction and the suffering inflicted on the civilian population, some modern scholars have argued that William's campaign in northern England amounted to an act of genocide. It remains one of the darkest and most controversial episodes of his reign. Galeazzo Maria Sforza became the 5th Duke of Milan in 1466, and his reputation for cruelty and moral corruption was so notorious that even his own father was said to be disgusted by his behavior. His reign quickly became associated with violence, excess, and shocking acts of abuse. Among the darkest stories told about him was his treatment of young women. Galeazzo reportedly purchased virgins, assaulted them, and then, after losing interest, handed them over to members of his court to suffer the same abuse. These accounts helped establish his reputation as one of the most depraved rulers of his time. During the early years of his rule, he governed alongside his mother. After her death, however, rumors spread that Galeazzo had arranged to have her poisoned in order to secure complete control of the duchy. Whether true or not, the accusation reflected the fear and distrust that surrounded him. He reacted with extreme violence toward anyone who challenged or offended him. When a priest publicly predicted that his reign would not last long, Galeazzo ordered that the man be starved to death. In another fit of jealousy, he had the hands of his romantic rival, Pietro da Castello, cut off. Another man, Pietro Drago, was reportedly nailed alive to his own coffin. Even the smallest crimes could bring horrifying punishments. One poacher was executed under Galeazzo's orders in a particularly grotesque way, being forced to swallow the entire hide of a hare, fur, and all. Stories like these became symbols of a ruler whose impulsive cruelty was matched only by his love of dramatic displays of power. In the end, his violent rule caught up with him. While attending Mass in church, Galeazzo Maria Sforza was assassinated after being stabbed to death, bringing his brutal reign to a sudden and bloody conclusion. Olga of Kiev presents one of the most remarkable contradictions in medieval history. How does someone remembered for carrying out such brutal acts of revenge eventually become recognized as a Christian saint? The answer lies in a life that combined ruthless vengeance with a later religious transformation. Around the age of 20, Olga became the regent of Kievan Rus after the death of her husband, Prince Igor. Because their son, Sviatoslav, was only 3 years old at the time, she became the first woman to rule the realm while governing in his name. Everything changed when Olga learned that Prince Igor had been killed by a neighboring tribe known as the Drevlians. According to the Byzantine chronicler Leo the Deacon, Igor was captured, tied to bent tree trunks, and torn apart when the trees were released. After hearing of his gruesome death, Olga swore to take revenge, and she pursued that goal with relentless determination. Her retaliation began with the Drevlian ambassadors who had come to meet with her. Olga reportedly ordered 20 of them to be buried alive in a large pit. Not long afterward, she invited another group of prominent Drevlian leaders to a bathhouse, where they were locked inside and burned to death. She then arranged a funeral feast in honor of her husband, during which thousands of Drevlians were said to have been massacred. The conflict soon grew into open war. Olga's forces defeated the Drevlians, devastated their army, and ultimately destroyed their capital, completing her campaign of vengeance against the people she blamed for her husband's death. After the violence had ended, Olga's life took a very different direction. She converted from Norse paganism to Christianity and became the first ruler of Kievan Rus to be baptized. She spent the rest of her life encouraging her son, her subjects, and neighboring peoples to embrace the Christian faith. Sometime around the 13th century, the Church officially recognized her as a saint. Our next ruler also comes from the Byzantine Empire, Andronikos I Komnenos. Born early in the 12th century, he was the nephew of a former emperor and built a reputation as a capable military commander. But behind that success was a man whose ambition and ruthlessness would eventually define his legacy. When his cousin, Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, died, the throne passed to his young son, Alexios II, while the boy's mother, Maria, served as regent. Andronikos saw the situation as the perfect opportunity to seize power for himself. It wasn't the first time he had revealed his true character. Even during Manuel's reign, he had plotted against his own cousin and scandalized the imperial court by carrying on affairs with 2 of his nieces. Determined to claim the throne, Andronikos gathered an army and marched on Constantinople. After entering the city, he had both Maria and the young Emperor Alexios arrested and removed from power. He then allowed violence to spiral out of control during the massacre of the Latins, when angry mobs slaughtered an estimated 60,000 Catholic men, women, and children living in the city. While chaos consumed Constantinople, Andronikos ordered Maria's execution. Before she was killed, he reportedly forced her own young son to sign the document authorizing her death. Although Andronikos initially ruled alongside Alexios II, that arrangement lasted only about 2 months before he had the 12-year-old emperor strangled so that no rival claimant remained. His actions became even more disturbing afterward. At around 65 years old, Andronikos married Agnes of France, the young widow of Alexios II, who was only 12 years old herself. Even by the standards of the Middle Ages, the marriage shocked many people. As emperor, he ruled through fear. Anyone suspected of disloyalty risked being blinded, while rebels often faced execution by impalement. His reign, however, did not last long. When his enemies finally overthrew him in 1185, the same kind of brutality he had inflicted on others was turned against him. He was handed over to an enraged mob, tied to a post, and tortured for 3 days. By the end of his ordeal, he had been mutilated, blinded, scalded, and finally torn apart. He died in agony in September 1185, bringing his violent rule to a gruesome end. No discussion of history's most ruthless medieval rulers would be complete without Genghis Khan. Born in 1162, he spent his early years in poverty in the Khenti Mountains of Mongolia, before rising to unite the Mongol tribes. From there, he launched a series of extraordinary military campaigns that created the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen, conquering vast regions of China and Central Asia. One of the most infamous episodes of his conquests took place in 1221 during the capture of the city of Merv. Even though the city surrendered, the Mongol army destroyed it anyway. According to historical accounts, Genghis Khan watched the executions from a golden throne while his soldiers looted the city and carried out mass killings. Medieval chroniclers estimated that somewhere between 700,000 and 1.3 million people lost their lives, although modern historians continue to debate those figures. Later, that same year, the Mongols attacked the city of Nishapur. After an intense bombardment, fierce fighting continued from house to house until the city's defenses finally collapsed. Once the battle was over, the surviving inhabitants were reportedly executed. Some chroniclers even claimed that pyramids of human skulls were built afterward, and that every living creature, including cats and dogs, was killed on Genghis Khan's orders. Only about 400 skilled artisans were supposedly spared, while the remaining population, estimated at roughly 170,000 people, was put to death. Genghis Khan died in August 1227. According to tradition, he insisted that the location of his burial remain a closely guarded secret. The explorer Marco Polo later repeated a grim story about the funeral procession, claiming that the 2,000 laborers who buried the emperor were killed by the guards escorting them. Those guards were then allegedly slain by another military unit, and the final group supposedly killed anyone who happened to see them before ultimately taking their own lives. Whether every detail of that story is true remains uncertain, but it has become one of the enduring legends surrounding his death. And that wraps up this brief look at some of the most feared rulers of the Middle Ages. In a world where many monarchs believed that ruling through fear was the only way to keep power, there are countless other stories of brutality that could have made this list. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed this style of video, or if you think I have a face made for radio and should probably stay behind the camera instead. As always, I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I hope you all have a fantastic week. Take care, everyone,